Hello everyone. So today we're gonna check some text analysis functions that are available in the Wolfram language. Before I start, just to thank James that did an exploration for the daily challenge day 1 on the brown anoles, which are an invasive species of lizards in Houston. So yeah, that's. Let me, and I think I also forgot to share with you the last poll question from yesterday about the predict function. So I will go ahead and share it with you. Wait. So can the predict function be used for inferring a butterfly sex from its image? That's the question. I will give you a couple of seconds and close the poll. So let's see. So actually, the straightforward answer is it's no, but technically, yeah, one could. So because it's no predict a function always will output a numerical value for if we want like to know to predict classes like sex, like female or male, or other classes, we should use classify. But yeah, you're right that one could use predict a function and then get a probability of being male or female, and then would be equivalent. But yeah, it was meant to be no. Let's check the outline for today. So I will start with checking out some text analysis functions like text sentences, text cases, word cloud, string count. Maybe you're familiar with some of them, maybe not, but it's going to be a coverage of several functions, and then I will go ahead with exploring a more sophisticated example using the Service Connect for Reddit, and we will explore like thousands of comments from a viral post on Reddit that I did last year on invasive stingbugs, and we will do some analysis on the comments, and with we will plot some graph as well. So for this first example, I'm going to use this resource object from the Wolfram data repository. Actually, it's the one of the books from Darwin on the origin of a species, and you can get this book just using resource data on the origin of a species. There's, for example, using a snippet, we can visualize the first 15 sentences. There is the function word cloud, which is quite useful for getting a grasp on what's about the topic, and you can see that it's about natural selection and species and the theories of evolution. Although the word evolution in the book is barely mentioned, just a few times. So text sentences will break the text as a string into a list of sentences. In this case, for the snippet that I was showing before, it was a string, but now it will produce a list of sentences. Some of them are quite large. And for text cases, it's also like an interesting function to know. It will try to identify certain, actually, if we go to the documentation for text cases, we will see that there is a lot of cases that we can ask for, and in this case, one can use one can ask for like mentions of cities in a text, or nouns, dates, and even like a currency amount. And for this case, I was using it for getting all the locations that Darwin in his book is mentioning. And from this, from here, from all these locations, one could use, for example, interpreter using location, and then obtain the geopositions of these places, these islands for this case. All right, for counting strings, we can use a string count and then specify the string that we want to count. Is not exactly the same as word count, but there's also like the word frequency, and a string count for it can be applied for not just words, but just a sequence of characters. For word counts, it will the output will be an association with key values, and the value will be the number of times that the word is present. And word counts also allows to specify how many n-grams you want to obtain to count. In this case, I'm using pairs of words, and you can see the most frequent pair of words. Deleting the stop words is natural selection. That's not surprising. And string contains Q. It's also an interesting function, especially if we want to obtain or select sentences that contain a certain word. In this case, I'm using select, and then I'm creating a list of all sentences in the books with text sentences, and then I will ask for which sentences contain, for example, the word cuckoo, which is it's a bird, and it will select automatically all the sentences that contain that word. So this can be useful for text analysis. Another interesting built-in function, it's a find textual answer. It uses machine learning to try to guess the answer to a question that you will pose. So in this paragraph, it's about the dodo. It's a extinct flightless bird. And here, and at the end of the paragraph, there is a mention on how big is the animal, and the thing that we'll try to guess, find textual answer, is that you can ask a question and then try to interpret that question and get a result. Text contents, it's similar to text cases, but it will try to do all types of cases and then display a data set. And you will see that it interprets many quantities as well as dates. So this is the first part of the today's lecture. And in the second part, I will talk, explore this Reddit post that I published last year. I was using Wolfram Language to create this animation on US on this stingback. It's an invasive stingback coming from China and Japan. and it was introduced in the early 20, I think, in the before the before the 2000 year, and I think it spread rapidly over the whole country. Maybe even some of you have encountered it, because during winter they try to get inside houses, and they can be like they try to hibernate inside houses, and they are best for also agriculture here in Europe as well. So it got quite viral on Reddit, and there were like more than 3,200 comments, many of them with heated replies about how much they hate these animals. And what we are going to do now next is to try to analyze all these comments and text from the Reddit users. So in the Wolfram language, there is one built-in function called Service Connect, which allow you to connect to external services. If you're not familiar with Service Connect, you can check the documentation page and check how does it work. Also, if you want to check what type of services, external services you can connect with, this is a list of them. Might be that there are like some extra ones. Like we can just check it. Yeah. So yeah, like there are like external services like connecting to Instagram database, yeah, Reddit, Twitter, Wikipedia. So it's a nice ways to retrieve data from that external platforms. So in this case, what I want to get is the post information on my Reddit comment. That's the URL of the post, and it will give me this kind of data set on data on it. And you can see that there's like the comments count. There were like 3,242 comments. And since there's a limitation on the number of posts that I can retrieve using this API from Reddit, what I will need first is to use this other API to get all the comments IDs. And then once I have all the comments IDs, what I will do is to run multiple times the Reddit service using comment reply data, and it will output a data set on comments from that post. I did it multiple times, and then I stored the data set on this cloud object. So you will able to just cloud get that data set directly. And once we have that, actually, there are like certain comments that are not obtained, but I got like 2,300, so it's a fair amount of comments for the following analysis. So here I want to show you how to use, for example, the built-in classifier that we have for profanity words. So the idea is that we want to get rid of all the profanity words on the comments. There were like many bad words there. And so then once we classify them and using pick and removing that profanity words, we can plot a word cloud. And you can see more or less the topics that people were talking about on these dingbags. Especially many of them were like commenting that they were getting into their house and smelling like cilantro, or yeah. It's more like a social exploration rather than biodiversity exploration in this case. The same for we could do the reverse thing, just pick up the profanity words and display a word cloud, but I hide it here, so I don't want to offend anyone. And there were like many insults there. But yeah, it's also like an interesting social exploration. For the following, what I'm going to do with this data set is to try to obtain all the comments about cats and dogs, so we can check what was like the interaction between these invasive stingbugs and cats and dogs from the Reddit users. So there were like a fairly high amount of comments about cats interacting with the stingbugs. And the same for what I was using is graph here to plot the parent comment with the following one, and then in the tooltip I was also displaying the comment, so one could go and check each of the comments. And next, what I was doing is to also include the comments about dogs and see if there were like some interaction or like between both comments, the ones about dogs and cats. And yeah, and then they're like plotting them, both of them together, the pet graph and the dog graph, what I'm calling here. We can see some interesting plots on the comments. And yeah, for example, this one says that that's funny because my dog loves eating them. And then another user is mentioning you should breed that dog, sell puppies and profit, things like this. And finally, I can try to display the whole graph with the initial post that I did, and then all the subsequent comments and nested comments on the comments, and then indicate the ones that are about cats and the ones that are about dogs, and we can see some correlation that someone is talking about their cat, and then another person is talking about dogs, and so on. I think I might need to update one of the code lines here. I haven't done the analysis for another post that went also viral on monarch butterflies, but it got less comments. It was only 250 comments, but people tend to love butterflies, and there was not much hate on that on these comments. I think I finished too early today, but I will share with you some polls on the for today. Let me see.
Jofre, before we move on to the polls, there's
Yes.
a question about the use of normal. So if you go back to the code, I think you use normal around like dog comments or cat comments.
Yes.
Can you show us what dog comments looks first, and then can you show us what happens when you do normal at dog comments?
Right. So this is dogs. I think for here I would just like do like this because it's this data set actually. So let's see if it works like. And what if one do normal on these dog comments, you will see that it automatically converts the data set into a list of associations. So normal basically converts the data set wrapper into a list of associations. I don't know if it solved the question here.
Sure. So I think the data set is this is specialized object, right? It's a
Right.
wrapper and it has a special appearance. So if you want, sometimes if you want to work with the data that's actually within the data set, we use normal, and now we have actually the list of associations, each association being a row in the data set, and we can work with it further.
Right. So then this each of these associations I was showing, it's going into this map and taking the key of the association for parent ID and ID, so and then using the tooltip for the content of the comment. So the body here, it's going to be the common content, yeah, and all that inside the graph, and then using a special graph layout. Is there some other question?
So one more question then, and actually this is also related to a question before. So these functions like text sentences, text cases, delete stop words, right now they are only supported for English, right? We do not have support for other languages.
Right.
Text cases, text sentences for sure. So if someone wants to use stop words that are not just English, would you have a suggestion of trying to do that? And this is a question from Jürgen.
Yes.
He's saying the stop words are
Yes.
currently only English words. How can we
So for example, you can use delete cases and then specify your own list of words that you want to kind of delete. In this case, I wanted first to clean up for this word cloud certain words that are not in the stop words list, but are not relevant for the word cloud. So one could do the same for another language words. I don't know if it will solve the problem. But yes, it would be like nice to have like deleted stop words in sorry, different languages.
Right, thanks. So delete stop words is the specialized function, and we can use the more generic delete cases to work around that. The fact that it's delete stop words is just working on English stop words. So
Right. That's correct. If you want to explore, there's a guide on the documentation about text analysis, and you can explore other related functions that I was not showing here that might be useful as letter counts, character counts. So I also recommend you to check this guide. I think I put it at the end. Yeah, the guide text analysis, and there's as well a chapter 11 on the elementary introduction to the Wolfram language book. There's also a chapter that you can practice on strings and text. So I don't know if maybe here now it's a good time to go to the poll questions.
actually, we have a few more questions coming just as you were speaking. So okay,
let's answer them.
Yes, please. Would you mind going back to where you're actually pulling the comments from Reddit and getting them into the notebook? Vitaly is asking, how are you actually getting the comments from Reddit into the notebook? So it's Service Connect, and then if you wouldn't mind walking us through that code once more.
Mhm. So yeah, so you need to do the service connect, write it, accept the conditions, and then for pulling out the comments, first what I was doing is to get the comments IDs using an external API, not for the service connect, but this special one here, API from push shift, and then specifying the ID of my Reddit post and requesting for comments IDs. Once you have that, then I'm using the service connect here, but on with the kind of the request for getting instead of initially I was using post information data. In this case, the request type is going to be comment reply data. You can check the details on that on the documentation for Reddit service execute. So that's actually somewhere here. Where is it? Yeah, in this request, comments reply data receiving replies to a comment. So on, and then I'm asking for these properties for the comment for gathering the data set: author ID, creation date, parent ID. And maybe then I was running this multiple times for all these 3,200 comments. Actually, even this external kind of external API for Reddit for getting the comments IDs was not getting all the comments. It was getting only like 2,000 something.
Is there like a limit per each connection that we can only get so many?
For our Wolfram service connection, there is a limit on 500 posts, so per request. So you have to do it multiple times if you reach that maximum. For this case, it was a large thread of comments, so I needed to run it multiple times.
So we would like set up something maybe like a scheduled task so that it runs after. Is there like a time limit that within this time limit you can only get 500, and so we have to run it again after that?
Right, I'm not sure if there's a time limit. Maybe the first thing to try, I don't remember exactly, the first thing to try is to just do a map and do it multiple times.
Okay, okay.
Without the schedule, might be enough doing like run or like a table and multiple times running the code, but not in a single call to the API.
Okay.
Yeah,
And what was the primary reason you used the push shift API?
I think because there was a limitation on yeah, I think on the for example, it can only, so like the built-in one was working with depth set to 1, so that means that the comments that were like threaded into comments might not be
Picked up.
pick up,
Mm-hmm.
at least for this special post where there were like too many comments, like 3,000 something.
I see.
For like a smaller post with less comments, that might be just fine to use the service connect.
Right. So for example, for Twitter, if we are just pulling tweets of about a topic, we should be able to just get all the tweets about a specific keyword.
Right,
But there also, we do have a limit on the number of tweets we can get, and then we can bypass it. Like if we are running into a limit again, as you mentioned, we just have to run it multiple times to get past that limit.
right. That's correct. Maybe it was not the most pedagogical example I was doing, but yeah.
Oh no, but it's cool, right? That was a really cool thread you had there. I mean, as a Reddit thread. So it was fun looking at it. Okay, so another question we have is, let me check which one makes more sense first. Um, All right, so between resource data and resource object, and this question is from Andrew. So we have our data repository and we can pull things from that. And on each example page in the repository, we see that first there's the examples showing us the resource object itself. And then when we try to pull the data resource into the notebook, we use resource data. Why is there this difference, and what should we keep in mind as we use the data from the data repository?
Right. So I think it contains like the resource object contains more metadata on the type of object that stores the resource object. So if you are just interested on the text, on the string containing the book, then it's that's why we're using like resource data, which will try to pick up the kind of the primary content of the resource object. It could be that it's something else than text. It could be like image or something else.
So
Right.
resource data will get you the primary data in that object. For this example here, so if it's the book, the primary data is the text of the book, whereas resource object is the entire data resource object along with the metadata. And sometimes there are secondary data elements too. And you'll find examples probably where you can say like resource data, name of the resource, and then comma, and then name of the secondary data element if you want to pull in that. But when you do resource data and the name of the resource object, it always pulls in the primary data element. Okay, so we have another question going back to the stop words. I think a lot of people are doing this text analysis running into these stop words. So his question is similar as this is from Herman, and he's asking, how would you go about creating the list of stop words? So if you could go back to your delete cases example and maybe show that just once more. So if he had to create a list of stop words in another language, I suppose there would be just replacing the list in your delete cases example.
Yes, I think you would use something like this and then specify the words that you want explicitly to be excluded from your list. If you want to know exactly what's the list of delete stop words, probably in the documentation there is information about that, and then maybe translate them to your own language. There might be like other ways to remove the stop words, but this is the one I kind of first thought about, like delete cases.
Did you run into comments in other languages, or is Reddit the thread limited to a specific language?
That's certainly from these like 2000 like 3,600 posts comments on this Reddit post. There were like some in Spanish, and I think there was some other language. There were like people from around the globe saying like that we have them in Italy, we have them. These stingbugs are also in Romania, I think. So there were like people from other regions. I'm not sure if it was in Spanish, but for sure in the monarch butterfly, there were like someone commenting in Spanish because of being them in Mexico. There was like someone from this area of Mexico where the monarch butterflies are wintering, and someone was like spotting them or like commenting them in, like for example, I think that was like this comment here that's in Spanish, but I haven't done the automatic language identify. So if you go to text analysis, you would be able to run this function automatically on the comments and try to guess the from the sentence from the comment content to identify the language. But yeah,
Thank you.
I haven't done that. I think that was even one person from Iceland commenting that when there's like a big wind, the butterflies can get deviated to even
Oh my
reach
goodness.
Iceland or UK. actually. Yeah.
Poor butterflies. So Mikhail and Roger are sharing 2 comments about creating list of stop words, and thank you for sharing those. So Mikhail suggesting we can also do like, count the words and then look at the most frequent words in the text. So I guess you would use either counts or word counts for that, and you would be able to see the frequency of each word. And Roger is suggesting that there is a project called Spacey, and he provides a link, and I can share this with everyone else, which have a publicly available stop word list. So thank you for sharing that. And actually, they have these lists by language. So if other folks are interested in stop words in, for example, German or other languages, you can check this link, and I will repost it so everybody has an access to this link.
Nice.
I think we can go on to the polls now.
Okay, let's share the first one for today. So which of the following best describes the utility yeah, for the built-in function Service Connect? Creating a connection to the Reddit API, accessing a specific page from Reddit website, analyzing imported data from Reddit, all of the above. It might be a bit tricky, this one, so I think I will close the poll and share the results. So actually, the right answer was the first one, creating a connection to the Reddit API without needing to get access to a specific page from the Reddit website. Yeah, but I can understand that all of the above, because one can then retrieve data and import data from Reddit. But the Service Connect itself is just for connecting to the Reddit API. I will go to the following poll. So what does classify profanity, X say about the statement X? Here X is a string. So the right answer was the second one, whether X contains profanity. It doesn't need to be just one word. X can be a sentence, and then one of the words in the sentence contains a profanity word, and it will read output as true.
So what it returns is really a true or false output, right? So true if it does contain
right.
something objectionable, and false
Right.
if it doesn't. Right.
And it's trained, so I don't know exactly on what was trained, the profanity built-in classifier, but maybe one can check on the documentation page for classify and profanity. I could check that. And of course, it works only on English profanity words. I don't think it works with other languages yet.
And the way you used it for the word cloud is that you actually broke up each sentence or comment into words. So you just broke everything up into single words, and then you ran the classifier on the words. And that is why you were able to get the result on a word basis rather than for the entire comment, right?
That's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That may be also like like what made a bit of confusion for this poll question. So, and the last one is the following one. So which visualization function is the best suited for studying the relationships among the comments? So a word cloud, a did histogram, a graph, or a bar chart? So actually it was the graph built-in function, so it can display the nodes can indicate a comment, and then the nested comments on each of the comments can be well visualized as a graph with vertices and nodes. For this particular example, if there is only one level, might be better to just display it as a word cloud maybe. But yeah, if it's a complex threaded comments, then maybe I think I use it a graph because it was better. I don't know if there's like some new questions.
No, apparently we do not have.
I might upload some daily challenge after the session on the community thread.
Sounds good. And again, reminding everyone that if there are further questions, feel free to jump in the conversation on the community forum. That's a great place where you also have the audience of many other enthusiastic Wolfram language users. So it's a great place to both post questions and share some incredible work that you have done using the Wolfram language. And there is one question about the link. So I think I'm going to test the link here quickly. Or Jofre, if you wouldn't mind just pulling off the link from the questions and sharing it on your screen. The GitHub link shared by Roger.
I see.
I have no issues accessing it. So Hitesh, if you wouldn't mind checking your browser or connection, it's coming up just fine. Okay, he says that it's working. All right. And Jofre, I think we also wanted to give a shout out to James for sharing his exploration on the community forum. Do you want to pull that up?
Yes, I think I mentioned briefly at the
You
beginning.
did. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, I missed that.
and
Yeah,
it
that's
was
the one, right?
an interesting invasive species that now is present in Houston City,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and the brown anole came from Cuba,
Uh-huh.
and I think the native species of lizards, the green lizard, I don't remember the right name, but is now decreasing because of these invasive species of lizard being present all over the city. That was an interesting use case of iNaturally search on that particular species using observations geo-range for and geobounds for Houston, the city. Yeah.
Right, thank you. And we also wanted to give a shout out to Neil. It was the last question from yesterday. He had posted about having issues with predict information. Was it predicting information or just predict?
I think it was predict information, right?
Information, and then we were not aware, but then Jofre revisited your question and he posted the resolution to the issue.
Actually, it was predictor measurements.
Sorry, predictor
Yeah,
measurements.
this line here was meant to be on the notebook because I used one that works for 12.2, and yeah, it was giving an error if you are using early versions. So that's the right line that you need to use.
Right, so thank you for pointing that out. If you have any further issues while going through the code in the notebook, please don't hesitate to get back to us. And Jofre has been kindly posting any resolutions that he can find for those code issues. So I think we are done here for today. Cassidy,
Yes.
over to you.